Good morning and welcome to Rose Red Homestead on this very snowy January morning. We've had several days of rain and then snow, and our whole backyard is now white. And poor Jim, we have some leaks in our garage and one place in our house. We're going to have to get the roofs repaired, sadly. But he was up there all day yesterday shoveling ice and snow off the roof so it wouldn't come through. Oh, winter time. But everyone is facing difficulties this winter, that's for sure. So we're going to do something pretty special today. But first I want to... We just have the most fantastic community, and I want to thank you all so very much for your participation in our book sale. And here's a little clip that Jim made just to tell you thank you.
Hi everybody, how are you doing today? Pam and I want to thank you very much for your participation in our book sale that we had for my birthday, and we appreciate it very much. Here's Pam.
I also want to thank you for responding to my request from our community page, asking what videos you might like for us to do and what books you would like to see for this coming year. For those of you that may not know how to participate in the things that I post on our community page, all you have to do is subscribe to our channel and click the bell so that you get notifications. And anytime I put any kind of an announcement up in the community page, then you'll get notified. You know, Jim and I can always come up with ideas to make videos on, but we want to make this very relevant for our community. And so, of course, we need your input. And you came up with some phenomenal ideas. I'm going to present most of them next Monday for Micro Moment Monday, but we're actually going to do one of them today. And this idea came from Carenza. And again, Carenza, it was a brilliant idea. Thank you so very much. And this really resonated with me. What she said was there are plenty of videos on how to can, and there's plenty of written instructions, but what we need is a very succinct set of instructions, simple instructions to help us do everything right. Well, that resonated immediately with me for two reasons. First reason is that I've been reading this book. It is called The Checklist Manifesto, How to Get Things Right. And I'm really impressed with the importance of making checklists for complex things. And it's not necessarily that canning is so incredibly complex, rather than it has progressive steps that need to be done in a certain order. And because so much hangs in the balance, we want to get it right. And this author, who is Atul Gawande, starts off in an emergency room. He's a doctor. Starts off in an emergency room with complex operation going on. Or maybe it's a surgical room, I don't remember which. And all of the different steps that the doctors go through to save this person's life, and how incredible the outcome is because each step was followed in the order that it needed to be. The second reason that this resonated with me is that Jim and I are right in the middle of making all of the videos and the materials for our pressure canning class that we hope to launch the 1st of February. And so this was my mindset anyway in pressure canning. So I developed over the last day and a half this list that is called Pressure Canning Checklist. It is a checklist, and it is 2 pages. And it will be a free download on our website. And I'll put the link to our website right here across the screen so you can go there and get it. And this one is for pressure canning. I'll do another one for water bath canning. Now, a couple of things. This is for canners like this one, stovetop canner, a Presto, a Miro, a Tefal canner. These are stovetop canners. All American operates just a little bit differently. The electric canners operate just a little bit differently. So this one is specifically for stovetop canners in the traditional sense. Now, there will be a lot of good information here for anyone who is doing pressure canning, but you may have to adapt some of the things for your own particular canner. Now, what this is going to be is a video about this checklist. And so I'm going to take you quickly through all of the steps as a checklist. We're not going to do any real canning or putting this on the fire. I'm just going to go through step by step. So people will be able to have a video and a checklist that are matched. So here we go through the checklist. Now the assumption is that you will do the food according to a tested recipe like the USDA or whatever. And all we're going to do is the canning process itself. So we're going to start with preparing the jars. First thing you want to do is check for nicks and cracks. If there aren't any, just set that jar aside and use it for something else besides canning. Then you'll wash the jars in hot soapy water, put them to drain, and then if your recipe calls for you also wash the rings and lids, same thing. And you can do that in your sink, you can do that in the dishwasher. We don't need to sanitize things anymore for pressure canning. Then, if your recipe calls for loading the food into a hot jar, you'll need to keep the jars warm either by pulling them out of the dishwasher right after it finishes, or having a sink full of hot water, or you can have a big kettle on the stove. Don't use your canner, because your canner, you're going to be using it for different things. I mean, you have to fill it all the way with water to submerge the jars. So use a different pot there. Then the next thing you need to do is to prepare the canner. You need to, first of all, just do a quick check. Check the placement of, I just washed this so it's wet. Check the placement of the gasket. Make sure it's clean underneath where the gasket is, and that the gasket is still nice and soft and pliable. And then the other thing you want to do is look through the vent hole. Mine appears to be clogged. Oh, that was it. I think it was a drop of water. And so either clean it by blowing through it the way I just did, or running a paper clip down through it. So make sure that that is done. And then place the rack in the bottom. Going to do that. And then you want to put however much water in the bottom of the canner that your instructions call for. Now, mine calls for 2 quarts of water. It's about 2 inches. Between 2 and 3 inches is pretty common. And then you turn the heat on under the canner to start warming the water. And you don't put the lid on, just leave the canner open, turn the heat on to start warming that water. And then you're going to want that water, you don't ever want to bring the water to boiling. It needs to be cooler than boiling and we'll get to why in just a minute. The next thing on the checklist is to know your altitude or elevation. This is critically important because it will tell you how much PSI, pounds per square inch, of pressure you are going to need to work with your canner at your elevation. Now, once you know that number, it never changes. So as long as you are canning in the same location, you can always know exactly what you are going to need, whether it is a 10-pound or a 15-pound weight, or on a dial canner, what yours is. For instance, this is a dial canner. We live at 5,000 feet. Our PSI for this elevation is 13 PSI. If I was using a weighted gauge canner, it would be 15, because there's no difference on a weighted gauge canner. You can't go in the numbers between 10 and 15. It's either 10 or 15, nothing in between. Then the next thing is for you to double check the processing time according to your tested recipe, and have that in your mind so that you will know what to set your timers for. The next step then is to fill the jars with the food according to the recipe. Some things go in all at one time, other things go in where you load solids in and put the liquid in. So whatever the recipe calls for, do it. And then check what the recipe says for the amount of head space, the distance between the top of the food and the top of the jar, and make sure that you follow that. And then using a non-metallic implement, you then reach down into the jar and stir the food around a little bit, just move it in order to release the bubbles. Now, they make specific little implements for canning if you want to do that. I won't ever buy one of those. I just think they're ridiculous when I have so many things at home that I can use myself. But if that's what you would like to do, then that's what you should get and use for yourself. So make sure that you do the debubbling. After you do the debubbling, everything might have dropped down a little bit because you release some air bubbles. And so refill either with the liquid or with more of the food to make sure that you are honoring that head space. Then you take a dampened paper towel and wipe the rim. Now, if there was any meat in the jar, there's likely to be some fat from that meat in the liquid that you're working with. Maybe some of that fat got on the rim. So instead of dampening with water, dampen with vinegar, and that cuts that fat. And make sure that you're going to have a really good seal. Then what you do is you place the lid, and this is, of course, a brand new lid, and it has been washed. And then you place the band or the ring. And the way that you do that, everybody wonders about finger tight because that's what we're told. Just imagine that the only muscles that you can possibly use are the muscles in your fingers. You don't want to put your palm down there, but fingertip tight. And you don't want to use your arm muscles, just whatever you've got right here. So you just tighten it down with your fingers. And don't crank it, because steam from the boiling food has to still come out from underneath this ring and escape the jar. That's what forms the vacuum after it starts then to cool down. Next step is to load the jars into the canner. Now, if you have done a raw pack, that means this jar is going to be cooler than if you've done a hot pack. And what we don't want is a temperature differential. What we don't want to create is thermal shock. So that temperature differential can't be too great between the jar and the water. And that's why you don't want to put a jar into boiling water. You want it to be below a simmer. The cooler the jar, the cooler the water should be. It can be warm, even hot, but it shouldn't be boiling. So you will place your jar right in the canner. And the jars need to be placed upright, not on their sides. Always, always upright. You need to be sure that you have a minimum of 4 jars. Whatever size, 4 jars in your canner. If you don't have 4 jars of food, then put a dummy jar in filled with water to make up 4. The next step would be then to put the lid on your canner. And lock it down. But what you do not want to do is put the weight on. The vent has to be open in order to exhaust steam. And so whatever style your canner is, just make sure that the vent, or sometimes it's called the petcock, make sure that it is open so that the steam can flow up here in just a minute. The next step then is to vent the canner. So crank the heat up to get that water boiling. It's fine to put it way, way high right now. You can get that water boiling as fast as you can. And what we're wanting to do is to replace the air in the canner with steam. And so steam has to blow out of this vent pipe for 10 minutes in order to ensure that all of the air has been replaced in the canner. Now, I don't go into any reasons why in this checklist, but I'll tell you the reason why that we want to replace that air. If it's air instead of steam, the internal pressure in the canner won't get high enough to kill botulism spores. So a good venting is absolutely necessary. So make sure that you have a good head of steam coming out here. And it takes 15 or 20 minutes sometimes to reach that point. So don't feel bad if it takes a little bit of time. You're still going to be okay. That head of steam coming out should be a good steady stream of steam. Once that steam is coming out in a steady stream, start your timer for 10 minutes and let it go for 10 full minutes. And I've put a little note in the checklist. This is also a good time for you to just check your canner to be sure that steam is not leaking out from under any other place. If it is, you need to turn the heat off, let it cool down enough that you can then open the lid and check the gasket. It may be time for you to replace that gasket, or it just may be that the gasket got a wrinkle in it or something, and just by straightening it out or making sure that it's clean underneath that gasket might be all that you need. But vent that canner for a full 10 minutes. And then the next step on the checklist is to bring the canner up to pressure. So put the weight on. This is called a dead weight on this particular canner, although it is a 15 psi weight. And I use that to my advantage that I explain in another video. When you put the weight on, it's now holding all the steam on the inside. And so it's building up pressure and building up pressure, and that's exactly what we want. And so then what we want to do is to watch that dial. For us, it needs to come right over here to 13 psi. If you don't have a dial canner and yours is a weighted gauge, then you're going to have either a 10-pound or a 15-pound weight in this spot. And as soon as it starts to jiggle. Now, I demonstrated in a very recent video how this one jiggles. And it is a constant but gentle jiggle. All canners don't do that. Some, I've read that the All-American only jiggles about 4 times per minute. About 1 time every 15 seconds, you'll get a psst, psst, psst. And Miro is something different as well. So please read your instruction book to know what to expect from your weighted gauge. Remember, this is not a dial canner. From a weighted gauge, know what you're supposed to listen for your jiggle. You need to continuously monitor the heat source to make sure that you are holding in as steady a pattern as you possibly can. Keep it at or above. It's okay in a dial canner if it goes up a pound or 2 from where you are. It's okay in a jiggler if it starts jiggling faster than normal. But try to keep it as constant as possible without going below the prescribed pressure. If ours goes below 13, we have to start all over again on the timing. So make sure that doesn't happen. And keep adjusting the heat until you find that sweet spot where then you can not have to monitor so much, but do continue to monitor all the way through the canning process to be sure that everything is fine. Once the processing time is finished, turn that heat off and walk away from the canner. Don't touch the canner. It can take anywhere from this canner takes anywhere from about 20 to 25 minutes all the way up to an hour. So once it is cooled all the way down and it is safe to open the canner, don't open it for another 10 minutes. Let it sit for an additional 10 minutes. And then when you open it, make sure that you open it with the lid facing away from you so the lid protects your face. So continuing this step, removing the food from the canner after you get the lid off, then you remove the jars one by one using a jar lifter and you put them out on a rack to cool. And then you don't touch them, you just leave them alone for several hours. 12 to 24 hours, most of the literature says, and that's just fine. And once they are completely cooled, you remove the rings. If the rings are stuck, which sometimes happens, you just leave them in place and run a sink of hot water up to about this much and put it upside down in a sink of hot water for a few minutes, and that band will then come loose, and then you can just loosen it just fine. Then the next thing is that you need to check for a good seal. And you can do that by tapping, or you can do that by noticing if it has a button in the middle, if that button is depressed. But the surefire way to check for a good seal is to lift the jar just by the lid. I just ran out to our food storage and got some peaches that I canned 8 of 21, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So you just lift the jar by the lid only. That's the seal. And so you know that you're good. And the next thing that you would do is to take your jar of food and put it in a sink of warm soapy water and wash the outside of the jar. Just make sure any residue, any stickiness, any oiliness is completely off the jar. And then it's ready for storage. Make sure that the jar is dry, and then you store it in a cool and dark place until you are ready to use it. And that's our checklist for pressure canning. Thank you again to Carenza for suggesting this idea of a set of simple instructions that I turned into a quick checklist. And I hope that you find this very useful, all of you. So once again, the checklist is on our website, and it is a free download. Once you get to our website, just go to the very bottom of the page. All of the free downloads are right there. It is not in our bookstore. It is on our website. And so the address is right across the bottom of the screen right now. I will also put it in the description under the video. So thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time in this new year.